Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you very much for the organizers for this great conference. So what I'm going to discuss here is discrepancy results, but considered from a symbolic viewpoint, from a viewpoint of dynamical systems with values acting on infinite or two-sided sequences. And I will focus on particular sets, which are called bounded reminder sets, for which the discrepancy is very good. It's so good that it's even bounded. So I will start to motivate the discussion here on the study of classical Kronecker sequences. I will recall some well-known facts about such sequences. Then I will introduce the methods for the symbolic viewpoint, and the main idea I want to discuss here and transmit here is that we can use methods from topological dynamics for their studies. I will discuss the issues between working with letters versus factors, and I will make the connection with Gottschalk-Ekelund's theorem, which is a classical basic theorem in topological dynamics and spectral point of view on this subject, and then discuss the examples of billiard in the hypercube. And if I have enough time, I will mention substitutions. So just as a warm-up, let's come back to the classical framework of discrepancy for Kronecker sequences, just to fix the ideas, the notation. So given an equidistributed sequence, we are looking at how well it is equidistributed, and then we consider the discrepancy, which is which takes into account the n first terms of the sequence, and I want to see how often you visit a given interval, and then I take a sub over all the intervals, and I want to see what is the behavior of such a sequence. Just a little remark, we have taken a supremum over all the intervals. Things work well in this framework because intervals are sets with a zero boundary measure, and then it's not difficult to see that if you have a bounded discrepancy for one interval, then you have also a bounded discrepancy for all intervals. And for a Kronecker sequence, we've seen it in the first lecture. It corresponds to take alpha 1, alpha d, and multiply it by n, and consider it in the d-dimensional unit hypercube. And then, from a dynamical viewpoint, it corresponds to take a translation on the d-dimensional torus, and you turn by plus alpha, or I have envisioned, I say turn because I have the rotation viewpoint on the d-dimension, on the case of dimension 1, but then I make a translation on this group. And then the discrepancy in this d-dimensional framework is given the same way, same flavor. Here I consider box. By box I consider shapes whose sides are aligned with the shapes of my d-dimensional torus. So I mean parallelepipeds here. I could consider spheres or different type of shapes having some nice property on the fact that the boundaries has zero measure. So that's my discrepancy. And now for bounded reminder sets. Bounded reminder set is some particular set for which this quantity is bounded. There is a priori no reason for such a set to exist, but we will see that they exist. So that's a particularly good case of distribution. So now I'm considering a particular set. I'm not taking the supremum over all intervals or boxes. I have a particular set in mind, and I want to see, this set is called a bounded reminder set, if for every n, the time spent in this set minus the expected value is bounded. So here in my discrepancy definitions are renormalized by n, what is usually done, and so that's a bounded reminder set. The difference between the time spent somewhere in this set minus n times its measure, it's bounded. So just before going to bounded reminder set, I just want to recall the growth order for the discrepancy. So for instance, if we have bounded partial quotients, or even if the C0 means are bounded, which is the case of badly approximable numbers, I mean, if we have bounded partial quotients, in the case of badly approximable number in the sense of Shigeki, and even if the C0 means are bounded, then we have a discrepancy which is in log of n. And then if we want to have the general, the almost everywhere behavior, it's a log of n times some function, which can be described in Khinchin's 0-1 law terms. That is to say, and I give the result already in dimension d, the discrepancies between log n to the d, to the dimension, it's between log n to the 1 plus epsilon. And if you want to phrase it in Khinchin's terms, you take a function phi, and according to the divergence or the convergence of the series, 1 over phi n, then you have a behavior which is in log n to the d, phi of log n. So here phi is 1 over n to the 1 plus epsilon. So it's to stress what happens for bounded remainder sets. If you take the supremum over all intervals or boxes, then you have log n to the d, which a factor which occurs, and this log n stuff, log n or log n 1 plus epsilon. And now for bounded remainder sets, we will stick to one particular interval for which we have something bounded. So that has been proved by Khinchin and then by Beck for the d-dimensional case. So we have this idea in mind, log n to the d. So I come back to bounded remainder sets. So I come back to particular sets. So I gave again the definition. So I took a measurable set, which is maybe not an interval or a box, but in fact, people will often consider the case of interval or boxes or parallelepipeds here in the last statement of this slide. So a bounded remainder set, as I said, is something for which we have a bounded difference between the time spent in x minus n times its measure. So I will phrase it in terms of ergodic theory, so in next slides, but so we have, in ergodic terms, we are in the framework of bounded ergodic deviations. So if we come back to the Kronecker case, so in dimension 1, bounded remainder intervals are those intervals whose length belongs to alpha z plus z. So whose length is related to the parameter of my translation. Then so it's all results by Kesson in '66, but it's there is a series of results at that same time. It's also approximatively the same time where Vera Turantius and all the other people phrased out the three-length theorem. So these were the same kind of ideas. Then Liardet proved, for instance, that it's not possible to have just a box which is a bounded remainder set. This also can be understood because if you take a rectangle in the two-dimensional torus, and you want to consider a translation by alpha beta, if you look at the sides of your rectangle, then you will have some constraints corresponding to, so that means that in this direction, when you project, you will have a bounded remainder set with respect to what happens like that, So that gives too much constraint if alpha and beta, one alpha beta is rationally independent. So that make too much constraints with respect to Keston theorem, which says you that here, if you work like that, you have to be connected to the parameter of the translation like that. So since one alpha beta are rationally independent, it's too much constraints. So you cannot work with boxes. And then there were a few examples in the literature of bounded remainder sets. But then, quite recently, there has been a very beautiful paper by Grebstadt and Leff, which produced nice bounded remainder set in terms of parallelepiped. So the idea is to take vectors belonging to z alpha plus zd. So here, I have in mind alpha being a d-dimensional vector. So now, if my vectors have coordinates in this d-dimensional additive group, then if we take vectors, d vectors in this group, then they provide you, and you take the corresponding parallelepiped generated by these vectors. Then it gives you a bounded reminder set with one alpha d, linearly independent. And then there has been also a very elegant proof of this result by Heinz, Kelly, Koivu-Salo, using IDs from quasicrystals from aperiodic order in the same spirit of what Shigeki also phrased in terms of Dolon sets, sets which are relatively dense and uniformly discrete and stuff like that, cut and project schemes. The idea beyond Grebstadt and Lev's approach was a Fourier analysis exhibiting a co-cycle map, and I will explain this when I will speak of Gottschalk-Hedlund's theorem. So these were two different approaches to this result, and I will try to see the connection between both approaches. So that's the situation for Kronecker sequences. And then my viewpoint will be to go to a symbolic world. The idea will be to simplify, in some sense, a Kronecker sequence by taking, by viewing my space T to the D, by providing a partition. I partition T to the D into K sets up to which make a partition up to sets of zero measure, and we code trajectories of my dynamical systems. So my dynamical systems are here the translation by alpha, by my vector alpha, alpha 1, alpha d, and then I code for every orbit under the action of this dynamical system for every point x. I consider its orbit, I consider the points x plus n alpha, and according to the atom in which my orbit falls, I associate with it an infinite sequence, and un is equal to I if only if I fall in the if atom when I make n iterates of my transformation alpha. So that's something completely classical. So a priori, it might seem quite naive. You lose a lot of information by making such coding, and whole the game will be to find a decent partition so that we don't lose too much information. So we don't want to lose too much information. And what is a good coding? So I will provide you examples of good codings just to see that it's not completely hopeless to have such a strategy to go from some continuous world to some discrete world where we look at just the traces of trajectories with respect to a given finite set partition. So this strategy corresponds to symbolic dynamics. So symbolic dynamics consists in working with dynamical systems based on infinite sequences, and it dates back to the work of Hadamard, and it has proved to be particularly useful for flows on surfaces of negative curvature. And it has been also used by Thue for the Thue-Morse substitution, which is not exactly the substitution Boris has used for his Thue-Morse example, but that's closely connected to what Boris explained, and Thue-Morse substitution produces an automaton and automatic sequences. And then, so there's a larger literature on this, and so with the goal of having a nice interplay between an original geometric dynamical system and its coding, and the idea is not to lose too much information in this interconnection. So just to fix the notation, I will, in this slide, just introduce some terminology. So what I mean by a factor of an infinite world obtained, for instance, by coding a trajectory, it's just a subworld of this infinite world which codes a trajectory. So here in this case, AA is a factor, but BB does not seem to be a factor. You never see a B and a B in a world. And then the set of factors of an infinite world correspond to the language of this infinite world. And then to introduce the dynamical systems we work with can be done as follows. So we considered the set of two-sided sequences with values in a finite alphabet. We take the product of the topologies, the discrete topologies on each copy of A. This can be seen in a metric way. You have a nice distance, which correspond to the following. If two B-infinite words coincide around the comma, around the zeroth term, then they are close. So that gives you the distance between two B-infinite words, if they are distant. So you take anything larger than 1, and you take it minus, so let's say 2, minus max, the length where of the common prefix they share. So you have a continuous map acting on this set, which is compact. So the continuous map is the shift. It's a homeomorphism on this compact set, this set of two-sided infinite words with values in a finite alphabet. And then given one infinite word, one B-infinite word, if I take its orbit under the action of the shift, so the shift just moves the comma. If I take the closure of this orbit, then I get something which is, again, compact on which the shift acts. So it's a symbolic dynamical system. And more generally, the subshift is some set of words with values in finite alphabet that is shift invariant and closed. So that makes a dynamical system exactly like the ones you've seen yesterday, just a symbolic one. And a very handy way to look at these things is that if you start with U and you take the symbolic dynamical system generated by U, it's just the sequences whose factors are included in the set of factors of my initial U. And if my system is minimal, that is to say, the orbit of every, the closure of the orbit of every every shift invariant, closed shift invariant subset is either the full set or the empty set. So in this minimal case, then every word has the same language. It's not only an inclusion. Okay, so that's a symbolic dynamical system. So the shift map replaces the dynamics we come from when we take a partition. So I mentioned the ergodic theorem. So what does, in terms of equidistribution information, what kind of information does the ergodic theorem give? So the ergodic theorem tells you how frequently you enter into some particular subset of the space on which you have a dynamical system. So it provides you information on concerning the fact that if you look at the first endpoints of the orbit of a point, you want to see how many of them belong to the set B I have highlighted in D. And then the ergodic theorem tells you that under ergodic hypothesis, for almost every point X, this converges to what you expect, the measure of the set. I have, when I say for almost every X, I've got in mind an underlying measure that describes my set. So being more precise, I'm given a dynamical system with a measure acting on it, which has a nice property of being invariant with respect to the action, plus the hypothesis of ergodicity, which says you that if a set is invariant under the action of my transformation, then it's everything or nothing up, so that the measure of this set is 0 or 1. And then with this nice requirement of this measure, we have the ergodic theorem, which says you that for almost every point, we have equidistribution with respect to this measure. And for a test function, which is in L1. So that's very nice to get equidistribution results. The drawback one could see is that it's an almost everywhere result. Okay, but that gives metric results. And then the problematic I have here is to see, to measure the deviation we have between this limit and it's between the limit and the series which converge to this limit. And so examples of dynamical system is Kronecker system, a symbolic one where we take the shift, beta maps that have been discussed by you yesterday. No, who discussed the beta map? Lignin, sorry. The beta map, continued fractions. So these are examples of dynamical systems for which all these discrepancy results, deviation of questions concerning ergodic theorem makes sense. And just to fix the ideas, I want to stress the fact that they behave in a different way. So in the sense that a translation on the torus is something of zero entropy, even if I haven't defined precisely what is the entropy, you can feel that it's more, it creates less disorder than multiplying by something. So you add something, adding alpha is less scrambling than multiplying by alpha. So we have two types of dynamical systems, and then and underlying this, we create different types of behavior of sequences, and we have different types of questions. So normality has to do with the behavior of the normality of numbers. I mean, 2n x 2 times n x has to do with the behavior of beta maps, where beta is equal to 2. And Kronecker sequence correspond to translation on the torus. So I will start with a seminal example first for symbolic dynamics, but also, as I claim that it makes sense to consider partition, I want to give you an example of a partition which does quite a good job for having properties concerning a Kronecker translation on the one-dimensional torus. So I take this translation, and I take the simplest partition I can think of with intervals. So if I take one interval, I do nothing. I code with a constant sequence. So I take at least two intervals. And then if I would take for intervals something of length 0 beta and 1 minus beta, with beta not correlated to alpha, I would create some kind of arithmetic disorder. So the simplest thing I can do is not to introduce a further parameter, is to code with respect to two intervals, which involve only alpha. That makes sense. So the question will be, if I take such symbolic dynamics with such naive coding, will I get information relevant to the behavior of alpha? Will I capture Diophantine properties of alpha, and so on and so forth? And this will be the case. In fact, coding orbits with respect to this correspond to approximating a line in z square of slope 1 alpha, and from a viewpoint also corresponding to aperiodic order, it corresponds to taking this square that you shift around the line of slope 1 alpha. You select all the integer points within this slide that you've created by shifting this square. So you get a lot of integer points, and you can relate them by such a stair with horizontal and vertical steps. So we can consider this like a cutting sequence. And then knowing if you have a vertical or horizontal step can be seen here in a transverse way. And it corresponds to the fact that you fall either in this interval or in this interval when you make alpha, 2 alpha, 3 alpha, and so on and so forth. So you progress by alpha, you take all these points with abscissa fractional part of n alpha. You look at, integer part of n alpha, and the fractional part of n alpha tells you whether you are going to see an horizontal or vertical step. So that's not difficult to go from this model to this model. Anyway, we just need this coding. And then what has been proved by Morsen and Loon in the 40s when they introduced this example of symbolic dynamics, which really developed this field, was that this is a good coding. So what is a good coding? So we have, So we have a commutative diagram by definition. That is to say, when you turn by alpha, when you apply plus alpha, then you have one step of the shift in your coding. But what is interesting here is that you have the best that you can have. You have an isomorphism between both spaces. You cannot have a topological isomorphism or homeomorphism because the topology of both spaces are different. You have a Cantor space in one hand and a continuous space in the other hand. But the difference, so the points for which you don't have isomorphism belong to a zero measure set, to a countable set. In fact, they just correspond to one orbit, the orbit of 0 here, because you could code with respect to two partitions having semi-open intervals in the other directions. Well, the mistake in this isomorphism, the mistake just corresponds to one orbit. This is the least you can do. And then that means that this is good coding. You don't lose too much information. And then I will just make a parenthesis with respect to this idea of taking of looking at Kronecker sequences with respect to taking characteristic function for sets. And so I come back to Khinchin's conjecture from the previous century, which was the following. Its conjecture was that given any measurable set, Lebesgue measurable set, the sequence n alpha would be uniformly distributed for almost every alpha with respect to this set. So Khinchin's conjecture starts with a set and expected n alpha to be uniformly distributed for almost every alpha with respect to S. And in fact, it was disproved by Marstrand in the 70s, and he was able to exhibit an open set, so it's quite a reasonable set. Even an open set could do the job to disprove Khinchin's conjecture, saying that you could, for every alpha, the time spent in this set is not what you expected. That is to say, something which is smaller than the measure. It's equal to 1. The lim sup of the time spent is equal to 1, and it should not be the case if we would have equidistribution. Okay, so that we have to be careful when we take our partitions, and we shouldn't work with any kind of sets. And just in this line of results, before Marstrand's results, which disproved Khinchin's conjecture, there were positive results, and I just record them here just to see how far we can go with ergodic theorem. So the first one gives you that if you fix alpha, then you have what is expected for intervals for almost every beta. So that's less stronger result than Khinchin. So why does it work here with respect to alpha and beta? Here it's just that you consider one dynamical system, this one, and for almost every starting point, you have ergodic theorem. So that's just a realization of the ergodic theorem. Then, if you look at the sequence 2n alpha, 2 to the n alpha, then the dynamical system is the multiplication by 2. And then, once again, it's an ergodic theorem. It comes from ergodic theorem because it's a result about, once again, starting point for the orbits. So these two positive results with respect to Khinchin conjecture just say nothing more than ergodic theorem works, and Khinchin's conjecture was much more demanding because Khinchin's conjecture was to play with different alphas. So it has nothing to do with one dynamical system. So if we play with different alphas, we come back to continued fraction. So it's a different dynamical systems, but it was not as easy as here, where we could consider these two dynamical systems. So it was just a parenthesis, just to say that we have to be careful when we take a characteristic set, But anyway, I will come back to these results later when I will come back to when I will discuss billiards. Now I enter, after half an hour, I enter the subject of what I wanted to discuss here, symbolic discrepancy. So now we have seen discrepancy, so we will look at symbolic discrepancy, and it's the same flavor of what Olivier explained yesterday. So given an infinite world, we have a notion of frequency. So the frequency is defined as the following limit if it exists. You count the number of letters in an infinite world. You can do it for letters and, of course, for factors. If you have in mind the analogy with intervals, we cannot just play with letters, but we have to have something to have considered factors. And, of course, if you take any kind of word, there is no reason for the frequency to exist. So saying that the frequency exists is it's a strong requirement. But then, if you think in terms of uniform distribution, it makes no sense to look at frequency. It makes sense, but you can think also of frequencies not taking only prefixes, but starting from anywhere in an infinite world. So that corresponds to the notion of world distribution. So you can also ask whether you have existence of such frequencies, not only on prefix, but anywhere in the world. And you can also ask whether you have uniform convergence. And this will correspond to unique ergodicity. So I phrased it like that. So unique ergodicity, in fact, means that you have a unique invariant measure. So unique ergodicity, if we come back to the dynamical systems we've seen so far, we've seen plus alpha or multiplication by beta. So plus alpha is uniquely ergodic. Multiplication by beta is definitely not uniquely ergodic. There are a lot of measures of maximal entropy, and so on and so forth. So uniquely ergodic, it's a strong requirement. So we are, when you are uniquely ergodic, we are usually with zero entropy systems. We have this world. And then unique ergodicity corresponds via the ergodic theorem given in topological dynamical terms to the fact that you have uniform factor frequencies for every factor. So it's a strong requirement. And just a remark, which is that we've counted we have considered frequencies of factors, but we could be more naive, just counting factors. So I've got a measure for an infinite world, a natural measure of its disorder, which is the number of factors of a given length. And by the way, now I can define a notion of entropy. The entropy would be the log of this function divided by n. And so a word of zero entropy is a word for which log of the number of factors divided by n tends to zero. And if you take a Champernowne norm, you take the dynamical system generated by Champernowne norm, then you will have, if it's on 0, 1 letters, you will have something which has 2 to the n factors of a given length, and which has entropy log 2 or log 2 divided by log 2. It depends on what you consider. And then what I claim is that if you have a small number of factors, then it gives you information on the frequencies of factors. So this information, which looks like topological, just counting number of factors, gives you metric results. It tells you that if you are a world for which you have less than 3n factors of length n, well, then you have a unique invariant measure. You have the frequencies exist, you have world distribution. So for instance, in the Sturmian world, the coding we have taken gives you n plus 1 factors of length n. We are uniquely ergodic. And I won't spend too much, but just for those who know interval exchanges, it generalizes translation. You have intervals that you exchange. Then you have a complexity 3n plus 1, and you can be uniquely ergodic or not. But for small complexities like that, you have nice results of unique ergodicity, and recently there have been very beautiful results in this direction, connecting the number of ergodic measures with factor complexity, results by Breinackra, Van Sier, Darmon, Fickenster. Okay, so that was just a parenthesis. So I come back to my symbolic discrepancy that I now can define. So now that you have a notion of frequency, symbolic frequency can be, discrepancy can be defined in a natural way. It corresponds to the speed of convergence toward your frequencies. So if you are given an infinite word u and a factor that you consider, which plays the role of interval for the Kronecker sequence, you count of the number of times you find this factor v in the prefix minus expected value. And if you think in terms of subshift, and why would it be interesting to have subshifts and not playing only with one infinite word, is that you get a compact space, you get more richness from a dynamical and topological viewpoint. So then, if I start with a subshift, so it's a set of infinite words, which is shift invariant and closed. It's a compact set on which the shift acts. Then you can, for a given v, consider the supremum of this value for every factor that you find in the sequence. So now I'm not sticking to prefixes. I take any factor of length n, big N, and you want, and you have finitely many of them if you're on finite alphabet, and you consider this difference. So I'm not doing the real discrepancy with the supremum over all interval. Here it's as I am in the case where I fix one interval, which is v. I take this supremum. If my measure behaves well, if it decays nicely, decently, which is quite often the case, when you increase the size of your factors, then you could also take a supremum over all v, and like we do in discrepancy when we take the supremum over all intervals. And then we've seen that unique ergodicity was demanding that to have a unique invariant measure. And in fact, we can even say more. Once you're minimal, as soon as you have frequencies for every factor, then you have more. You have this well distribution result. So just the convergence gives you here well distribution. Okay, so that's the notion of symbolic discrepancy. And so let's see examples. So I take as an example something generated by substitution. So with this substitution here, how do I generate an infinite word? Well, I start with 0, and I consider all my iterates with 0. So I start with 0, and the image of 0 starts with 0. So that means that I will have stuff which are prefixes which are nested. I've got a nested sequence of prefixes. Then it converges to a one-sided word. And I can, by taking a power of the substitution, I can make it two-sided. With the same argument, there is the image of 0 which will end with 0. So I can create infinite words. I can create a subshift generated by this substitution. And it's an example of a Sturmian word. We have n plus 1 factors of length n. And then we have a bounded discrepancy for every factor. So it's a coding of the rotation by the golden ratio. And in fact, it's a symbolic version of Keston's theorem that said that if the intervals have length related to alpha, then we have bounded remainder sets. So that can be done by hand on this example with combinatorial terms and recover that we have a bounded discrepancy. And then if we modified slightly our substitution, so it's really similar, but just we added a 0 in the image of 1. So it looks really similar. And then we have symbolic discrepancy bounded for letters, but not for words of length larger than 2. So for letters, there is no big miracle. You replace 0 by 0, 1, 1 by 1, 0. You start with any kind of infinite word, the Champernowne one on the two-letter alphabet, which definitely has not bounded symbolic discrepancy. You replace it, you apply this substitution, this map on this word, which is which does not behave well for discrepancy, then you get something which has bounded discrepancy on letters. So for letters, it doesn't give much information. But the fact that it's not for words, the discrepancy is not bounded for words of length 2, shows that there is a behavior which is distinct. And so it's not being, just because you're generated by a substitution that you have balanced discrepancy, that you have bounded discrepancy. So according to the time I will give criteria for explaining this. But these are the two examples I have in mind here in this lecture to try to figure out what's the difference, what happens. And I will, my approach will be from topological dynamics. That is to say, I will try to forget in some sense the measures, and we will see how to prove. My aim is to give you ideas on how to prove these two statements. And then I make a lot of lapses when I speak, and often I use the term balanced. It's because in word combinatorics, this notion of bounded discrepancy was called balancedness, and it just says the following. It says that if you take two words of the same length, x and y, in a language, in the set of factors of a given subshift, if you take two words of the same length and you count the number of times you see one given factor, v, then the difference is bounded. It's not difficult to see that if you're balanced, then frequencies exist, you have world distribution, you have unique ergodicity, and you have bounded discrepancy.
This is only the language.
Exactly. I'm given a subshift, so I'm given a language, or I could start with an infinite word and take its language. Yeah. So it's given a language. Inside this language, I want this strong requirement to have the full shift. Exactly. Yeah, it's a very strong low discrepancy. Yeah, it's for all the intervals cylinders which correspond to the factors v. Well, I can either restrict to one interval to one v, or to all intervals to all v. So if I've got balanced for all v, then it's super strong, and it cannot happen for a sequence, for instance, n alpha. So I've got in mind this analogy. V factor corresponds to cylinder set of infinite words which start with the same V, or interval for Kronecker word. So a priori, when we look at that, we could say it doesn't exist, it's too strong, but Fibonacci sequence satisfies it. The nice viewpoint for balancedness is that you don't need to compute the frequency, so it's something you can do by hand. So as an exercise, the Fibonacci sequence, you really can prove just by looking at the substitution and its matrix. So the substitution was... So I can look at a matrix which counts the number of occurrences of each letters. So you have a 0, a 1, a 0, no 1. So you could look at this Abelianized version of this object, and you look at these powers. You have Perron-Frobenius theory, which is behind because the entries are non-negative. And so this is how you can prove balancedness on letters, for instance, just by hand, by looking at this matrix. Okay, so that was a small parenthesis on balancedness. So now I enter what I wanted really to stress here is that the use of topological methods for this kind of questions. So that's where we are. We know that the discrepancy is bounded if the ergodic sums corresponding to the time, the indicatrice function of some cylinder V. So V, cylinder V, correspond to the sequence X in my subshift, such that x0, x length of V minus 1 is equal to V. Correspond to the sequences which start with V. If I am on one side, it's direction, or let's say it like that. So that's the definition of V. So my ergodic sum on the function f, which is characteristic sequence minus mu v times 1 minus mu v minus its measure. So if I look at such an ergodic sum, it's just this discrepancy. So I want to know when I have bounded discrepancy. Well, we have a nice classical old result from topological dynamics, which says that ergodic sums are bounded if only if one has a coboundary. So I use the term topological dynamics. Why? Because here in this statement, I'm just in topological dynamics terms, because I've got a compact metric space, homeomorphism, which is minimal. Minimal is that all the sets which are stable by, the closure of all the orbits are either all the set or the empty set. Well, if the closure of every orbit is all the set. Then I take a continuous function, and then this theorem says that if you have a bounded ergodic sum, then there exists some continuous function such that f is a coboundary. So what is easy to see is that if f is written like that, when you make such a sum, it's a telescopic sum, it's bounded. So the interest of this theorem is to say that when it's bounded, that's the information that this theorem gives you, the existence of such a G. So we will see how to exploit this information. And when I mention quickly that Grabstadt and Lev, in their result on the bounded remainder sets in the d-dimensional case, use Fourier analysis, their approach was to exhibit this G for proving that their sets were bounded remainder sets. Okay, so that's where we are. So let's see what information we can have more. So we know that discrepancy is bounded on this particular V, if only if this function is a coboundary. So f is a coboundary, like that. I just take the exponential of this. The exponential 2i pi of some indicator function takes always the same value, it's 1. So then this equation just can be written like that when you take exponential 2i pi. So this function is equal to a constant times this function. So that is to say, when I compose by my dynamical system, I multiply. So that's just an eigenvalue of the so-called Kupan operator. It's a continuous eigenvalue associated with this dynamical system. So in spectral terms, we arrive to the theory of spectral theory of dynamical systems. It's, as soon as you have an eigenvalue like that, it tells you that in the commutative diagram that we had before, so it tells you that we have our dynamical system like that. And now I get some action on a group, which is a factor of my system. So I've got my commutative diagram, and here, so the map is onto. It may be not an isomorphism, but you've got a rotation factor. So you know that in your system, you get some rotation factor, a translation on a group. A translation on a group is a very simple dynamical system. So you get information on your global system. You know that you have some this kind of stuff. So that means that the measure of your system has to be an eigenvalue. But then it gives you restriction on your system, because if you knew the spectral properties of the system, if you knew the maximal equicontinuous factor, if you know all the topological rotation factors you can have, that gives you constraint on mu v. So that's a way to disprove that something is a bounded remainder set, or if you exhibit a coboundary, it's a way of proving that it's a bounded remainder set. So so my main point here was to stress this connection. That is to say, you start with a statement which can be seen as a metric, topological, and then you can translate it into a spectral information. So this is not something new. It's an old idea in the world of bounded remainder sets and so on and so forth. But now I want to stress how we can exploit this kind of idea. So I will illustrate it in the world of billiards. So I come back to my Sturmian world. So in the Sturmian world, we've seen that we have coded factors with respect to two intervals. Now, it's not difficult to see that, for instance, if alpha is smaller than 1/2, if you want to know when you see 0 followed by a 0, that means that you fall in this pink interval. Because once you're here, you read a 0, you turn by alpha, you're still in the blue interval, you see again a 0. So, in fact, factors of length 2 can be represented correspond to subintervals of your interval that you can get in an explicit way. You can do it for factors of length n. And then frequencies of factors correspond to length of these intervals. So if you want to have results on length of intervals, we can go in the Kronecker world and play with uniform distribution. And the three-gap theorem just corresponds to saying that the frequencies of factors of a given length take three lengths. And the results, we say, all the results we had on the minimal spacing corresponds to the minimal length and stuff like that. Okay, so let's now consider a higher dimensional case. So let's play the billiard. So what I want to first illustrate here is the fact that a Sturmian sequence corresponds to play the billiard in a square. If you unfold the trajectory, you have this viewpoint that we've seen before. And we are not looking at the billiard in a square looking at how long it takes in some area. We are just looking at a cutting sequence. That is to say, we code the sides of the sides of the billiard table we're playing on with respect to letters. So we consider the parallel sides, and according to which side we hit, we code stuff. So that's a Sturmian sequence. So when I said that I now want to play the billiard in a higher dimensional space, I take a hypercube, I play the billiard in my hypercube, I unfold, and I will want to know which sides of my hypercube I meet. So now the question I will ask is, do we have the nice property of Sturmian worlds to be balanced for every factor for billiard worlds? And then we will see that it will not work in the same way. So I consider now a billiard in the hypercube with decent requirements on my slope. That is to say, alpha 1, alpha d is linearly independent. Now it's minimal, uniquely ergodic. And then we can ask whether we have a bounded discrepancy for factors and letters. So now what happens is that we have bounded discrepancy for letters, but not for factors. So how to prove that? So assume that we have bounded discrepancy for a factor. And let's take a factor of length 2. Then I use Gottschalk-Edlund. I need mu, its measure, to be an additive eigenvector. But now I completely understand the spectral properties of a billiard. A billiard, in fact, is isomorphic, measure theoretic isomorphic to a translation by alpha 1, alpha d. That's exactly what we had before in the Sturmian world. A billiard, you can feel that it corresponds, the coding of a billiard corresponds to a translation by alpha 1, alpha d. So that gives you this kind of requirement. But then, if we make the same picture that we had when I gave you the factors of length 2 for a Sturmian world, we have a picture like that. You project your cube according to the vector of the slope, and then you have 7 possible areas, which tells you the 7 possible combination of sides that you hit. But then if you look at these areas, they don't all belong to this additive group. When you compute them, then you have some real numbers that play so they belong to the vector space, the R vector space generated by this coordinate, but not to the, well, it doesn't mean, they don't belong to this additive group. And then it disproves the fact that you have balance for factors of length 2. So that's an easy use of Gottschalk-Edlund's theorem. People from a periodic order or people from dimension group theory will say the cohomology is not finitely generated, but I will not spend too much time on this. But I just want to revisit our classical Kronecker examples with this. Okay, so compare, I want first to stress the difference between the Stomian case, d equal 2, and the cubic case. So for the in dimension 2, all factors have bounded discrepancy, and suddenly if we increase the dimension, we've lost this. Well, what happened? In the Stomian case, the intervals which correspond to factor had length which belong to Z alpha plus Z, because we've seen we put the point minus 2 alpha, so we put the point minus 3 alpha. So in fact, it corresponds to Keston theorem. Keston theorem says that if the intervals have length in Z plus Z alpha, we have bounded discrepancy. That happens with the Stomian worlds in dimension, well, I say D, or it depends what I call the dimension, but when dimension D is the billiard in the square, but the dynamics live in the Kronecker world on the 0-1 interval. And now I come to Greb, Stadt, and Lev. What does it mean for the case of hypercubic billiards? Is that, okay, letters have bounded discrepancy, because the picture I had here, this, if you take out the inner, the extra edges, if you take just a cube that goes out, or for instance, then it corresponds to the letters. If you don't add extra, so suppose we keep this, we don't add extra edges, the areas are still in a distributed group generated by alpha 1, alpha d. So it's a statement about letters that say that they have bounded discrepancy, but is not in contradiction with what happens as soon as we take factors of length larger than 2. And then the proof of Heinz, Kelly, Koivu-Salo is in this spirit. It was to see this statement on parallelepiped in RD as something corresponding to hypercube in RD plus 1, which is quite classical to add one dimension. And then, since I mentioned Khinchin's theorem, Khinchin's conjecture, I just want also to come back to results by Beck. So remember, Khinchin's conjecture was disproved by Marstrand, saying we cannot find some interval which does the job for almost every alpha of bounded symbolic discrepancy. But then what Beck did was to give a positive answer to Khinchin's conjecture in continuous time and in higher dimension. So now the dynamics is the billiard in the square. It's not I'm not looking at which side I hit. I'm just looking at what you expect with this dynamical system. You want to see the time spent in some bounded area. And then Beck has this very beautiful superuniformity result, which says that the time spent for a dynamical system in a square billiard table is the discrepancy is in log t to the 3 plus epsilon. So with respect to maybe usual estimate you have in mind, that means you divide by t. So log t 3 plus epsilon divided by t. So that's super nice behavior of the discrepancy for almost every alpha. And then if you increase the dimension, you lose a little bit. You have a t to the 1/4, t to something which tends to 1/2 when d tends to infinity. And you have this nice continuous version of Khinchin's conjecture. So for every measurable set, you have something which does the job for almost every parameter. So I just wanted to quote it with respect to billiard words. And the dynamics we are describing here is the dynamics which gives you, we use to prove that the measures of factors of a given length correspond to belonging to some subpart of the billiard table. Okay, so that was the examples I wanted to discuss here. And I wanted also to discuss substitutions. But I will end here, it's more reasonable. And the results I had with substitutions were in continuation with results Boris had previously for substitutions. And the work of Boris was to underline the role played for substitutions by their matrices, their incidence matrices. And then, roughly speaking, the idea highlighted by Boris was that if in the spectrum, in the eigenvalues of these matrices, if you are in the Piso case, that is to say, one eigenvalue larger than one and all the other ones smaller than one in modulus, then you have balance. Well, okay, that's true. But then it remained the case where you have eigenvalues of modulus 1, which were even roots of unity. And then the criteria of Boris were not just by looking at the matrix able to say whether we have balanced or not balanced, and then Boris had to use combinatorial criteria. So what we developed with Pauline Acecchi were topological criteria to prove or disprove balanced. So for instance, we have a topological proof of the fact that the two-Morse substitution is not balanced of factors of length at least 2. And just to give a flavor of the idea, is that we use a topological object, the dynamical dimension group, and I really simplify what is of interest for us, is just to take continuous functions modulo coboundaries. Coboundaries are the what correspond to bounded ergodic averages. So if we want to understand what happens here, we forget about them. And then, for instance, in the Stomian case, this group is just generated by the Kaotis functions corresponding to letters. And it's not difficult to prove that this group is just Z squared, isomorphic to Z squared. That means to say that every characteristic function of any factor belongs additively to this group. So that gives a proof that it's balanced on any factor because they behave well. So you're in the same group, you behave well. But for the two-Morse substitution, the determinant of the matrix, well, is 0, so it's stupid what I want to say. But if you take the direct limit of these matrices, you get Z of 1/2. You can feel the 1/2 intervenes here. And then we can check that by looking at the frequency of AA, you have a 1/6. The frequency of AA is a 1/6. You have a 3 that ruins everything. So we cannot say that it belongs to the group generated by the frequencies of letters. So that's a way of disproving that we have bounded discrepancy in this example. So it's very sketchy. But the only message I want to transmit here is that we can use really a topological dynamics viewpoint. We can use the dimension group, which comes from C-star algebra, which is used to describe its complete invariant for strong orbit equivalence. So it's a different word in some sense, but it gives insight on discrepancy. And then to use this kind of approach, we need to decompose nicely our subshift on which we work, and we have a lot of classical tools ideas, is to decompose it in Kakutoni-Rockling towers. We have all this, but I won't spend much time on this. But we have nice decomposition tools of subshifts, which allow to tackle this kind of questions in a topological dynamical viewpoint, which offers more information than just having the Kronecker viewpoint on this. And I will stop here. Thank you. So if the dimension group has the same, is Z to the D, for instance, then so it's not a sufficient condition, it's a necessary condition. So if the is isomorphic to the Z to the cardinality of the alphabet, then if I am balanced on letters, it will transmit to factors. you could be isomorphic to ZD, like a 3-interval exchange, which would be weakly mixing and having no bounded discrepancy. But once it's good for letters, it transmits to factors. So in some sense, it's a condition which allows you to go from particular intervals, letters, to any kind of intervals of any size. So on the dimension group. Exactly. So it's a way. It can be used to prove that we have non-balancedness, like we did for 2 months, and no, in fact, for a substitution, you have an effective way to find the dimension group. You go to the sigma 2 substitution and so on and so forth. You can do it completely explicitly for one substitution. If you give me a subshift, then it can be more difficult for a subshift. But for a substitution, yes, we can find the dimension group. Thank you.